Hi guys, welcome to the video. Welcome to Popham, an airfield in the UK, quite an iconic airfield in many respects, and welcome to this sort of 6-month update on the Pimax Crystal Lite that I bought used from a third party. And what we're going to do in the video is we're going to have a look at my experience following that. Some pros, some cons, there's a bit of both. And those who've watched my channel know that I say it as it is. If I see it, I say it. And wherever possible, I will show you guys what I'm on about. Now, before we go any further, I'm just going to mention I've demonetized my channel to try and remove as many adverts as I can. YouTube does not pay a great deal in terms of money. So unless you've got hundreds of thousands, if not millions of viewers, for me, it just doesn't warrant having all the additional adverts and the aggro that goes with all that sort of stuff. So as I say, I've demonetized it, so hopefully it will reduce the number of adverts that you guys have to sit through in terms of videos. It's just one of those things. It's a personal decision. I'm not saying it's a good or bad decision, but it's just a decision that I made. The second thing is that I'm just going to mention this now. I bought this headset from a third-party reseller. There are some that are going to be better than others. The one that I used was eBay. I'm going to stress this throughout, really. Unless you're willing to lose the money that you are putting up front, I would suggest don't do it. Purely out of the fact that it's a significant amount of money and it's a lot to lose if it all goes wrong, because of various reasons I'll mention in a bit. In terms of Popham, never flew into here in real life. It's quite an iconic airfield in the UK. It's got, as you can see, this canted approach. This isn't a runway here. This is your approach as you come in. So you follow this and you get to a turn where you get to a point where you then turn to land. So it avoids all this area over here. It's a well-known approach which most GA pilots in the UK are aware of, but it's the sort of thing that I feel benefits from VR. So before we go any further, I'm just going to mention the cost in terms of hardware versus VR. VR is an expensive but not exclusively expensive pathway to follow in flight simulation. You would argue there's 3 pathways. The first is to add nothing to it. The second is to go down a route of adding hardware for controls, etc. The third is to go down the route of adding hardware in terms of VR. And I've just had a quick look at what I've got. So as the hardware, I've not really got much, but the hardware that applies to the visual aspects of the sim, or the control aspects more accurately. Obviously, if you're using 2D, you then get the more options to use physical hardware. And by that I mean I've got a mini cockpit set up with the FCU, EFIS and the mini overhead, and I've also got the wing McDo, and then HOTAS bits and bobs. Now obviously the HOTAS bits and bobs, they're common between all sims. They're just basically buttons and controls. However, the other physical bits, the McDo, the EFIS panel, etc., that's no use in VR. So you kind of end up in a situation where there's almost 2 pathways to diverge, going down the hardware pathway or going down the VR pathway. And both have advantages and disadvantages. So the hardware, you can go and make a cup of tea quite easily. You can see what's on your desk. You can see everything. You can easily use hardware, third-party controls, etc., etc. But VR gives you a level of immersion that a 2D flat screen just can't do. And I'll fly around a bit later on, as I say, and we'll have a discussion about that in terms of quality, what you can see, what you can't see, and so on and so forth. But just to give you an idea of the cost, the additional hardware cost for me, if I were to just break down the bits that affect or are associated with the visual impacts or control impact, the mini cockpit stuff I've got works out at £462. The wind control McDo works out at £112. The total is £574. So I'm ignoring all the other hardware that really doesn't make a difference to the experience, whichever format you're flying in. Whereas the Pimax used, I got it for £470 plus post and packing. so it's pretty cheap, to be honest, for what it is. And then new now, because they've changed it, you can't buy it without the handset or the hand controllers. It's £718 plus shipping plus taxes, so it's a fair chunk. And I haven't worked it out, but I would hazard a guess it's probably about £1,000. So going down the used route for me cut the price by about half. However, I'm going to reiterate throughout the whole video, not to want to be too repetitive, but unless you want to lose that money, do not buy used gear, with the exception of a couple of organisations or shops or whatever that will give you a guarantee. So for example, CEX in the UK, they will give you 2-year warranty on anything you buy from them. However, you won't get it half price, you'll get it at a reduced price if you can find it with them. They don't tend to get things like VR headsets up very much. It's not a market that they're interested in overly. I did look at selling a previous headset with them, and they just basically weren't interested, even though technically they could have bought it. I'm not going to be nasty about them, because there's so much with a VR headset that can devalue it. So if you get any scratches on lenses, that sort of thing, and it can both ruin the value of the item and also the experience. So that's the first thing I would say, is just be incredibly careful. I would recommend not doing it unless you're willing to lose that money outright. And even those where you would get a decent guarantee, the chances are that you're going to be paying nearly the same as buying it new anyway. So as I say, I went down the pathway because I was willing to take that risk. And I actually came out okay. So the headset I got was decent. The other thing I'm going to mention about buying used is that you might not necessarily get all of the bits and bobs that came with the item when it was new. Conversely, you might get extra bits and bobs. So my headset's got the comfort bits for the eye around your brow, etc., around the side of the face. It didn't seem to have the original face bits with it. Likewise, it came with weights for the back, because VR headsets are inherently front heavy, so that's an attempt to balance it out. Obviously that makes the whole headset heavier, and so then it becomes a comfort issue compared to cost, weight, etc. So there's a lot going on in terms of bits that are either missing, or you don't know that are missing, or are new or fresh or whatever, if you go down the second-hand route. And so, as I say, I think I've got some bits missing, but you know, I can't say for definite. I know certainly I've got some additional bits that have been beneficial. So what we're going to do is we're going to discuss some of the key points in terms of my experience, both pros and cons, and we will try and do that in the air. If I can remember what this list is, we will go through it. So we'll take the DA42, which is by Cows Simulation. Excellent third-party aircraft. I've reviewed it before on the channel. I'd highly recommend having a look at their products. Really, really good, high-quality GA stuff. Actually, before we go any further, I'm just going to mention you need to consider the environment that you're going to operate in terms of VR. Inherently, it is great for VFR, helicopters, VFR, low-level GA aircraft, combat, that sort of thing, because inherently it works well in those environments. Airliners I've had a lot less joy with. If I'm being brutally honest, I've had a lot less joy. And in fact, let's bring over a couple of pages, web pages, so that we can discuss a couple of bits before we get airborne. So I do apologise. I'm trying to keep this as short as I can as a video. If you go to the Pimax store, it will tell you all about the Crystal Lite, which is the headset that I bought. There's a lot of stuff on there. I will be honest, there's a lot of stuff that I think is sales speak over and above everything else. So resolution 17 million pixels, well, that could be 17 million bananas for all I know. It's very difficult to be able to sort of contemplate what 17 million pixels looks like. I would suggest that if I piled 17 million bananas in front of you, it would look like a massive pile, but beyond that you wouldn't really be able to comprehend it. And scientists will say that, you know, and I've watched stuff on YouTube from leading scientists, they will say there becomes a point where the number is, you can state the number, but you can't comprehend the amount of something. So once people start saying 17 million pixels, it might as well be bananas for me in some respects. Field of view, they're always going to try and promote what they see the strengths of their products are. So wide field of view, lots of lovely stuff. As I say, now, initially when this thing came out, you could buy it without the controllers. I don't think you can now. Okay, the first thing I'm going to mention is that the software is pretty simple, pretty straightforward. I had a few issues setting it up, but that's just because I'm a bit of a muppet on occasions. I did have a few issues setting up, but now I've set it up, it seems to be quite stable, and it seems to be quite happy with what it's doing. Optimized for today's gaming PCs. For me, I wouldn't. I mean, this goes for a lot of manufacturers, developers, sales pitches. The RTX 2080 for me is too underpowered for this headset. You've got to remember, you're strapping, if you know, I've got a 2-monitor setup and I'm strapping another 2 HD monitors to the face. So in effect, I'm running a 4-monitor system instead of 2. So an RTX 2080, I think for me, I would consider that to be inadequate for running some of the bigger titles. So Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024, DCS, etc. You will get them to run. There's no doubt it will run those programs, but the stress on the system will be so much. And actually, VRAM have come into an issue with Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024. It already uses a lot of VRAM. So I've got a 16 gig card. It's an NVIDIA RTX 4080. So you can't really get much higher. Certainly in terms of NVIDIA, the only cards higher are the 5080, the 4090 and the 5090. The 4090 and the 5090 are the only 2 cards that have got more than 16 gig. So, you know, I've been headbutting, and it might well ping up when we load in. I've been headbutting the VRAM limit of the GPU. So I'm running, when I'm normally running, I don't know if it's easy to see down here, but somewhere down here it's got the GPU. Where's it gone? Graphics queue down here. Allocated for the GPU at the moment is GPU memory. Here we go. At the moment it's only at 7.5, but it will jump up to about 12, 11.5 to 12 once I'm into the sim proper, and then once I go into VR it jumps up to over 15. You can see it's occasionally flickering already here. By the way, if it's green, it means it's underutilizing it. If it's flickering, it's just getting to the point where it's on the limit. And then if it's solid red, it means you've not necessarily exceeded the limit, but you're at or above the limit. And at that point, if you keep going, you'll start to grind everything to a slow, stuttering slideshow. But yeah, so you can see the performance here, and as I say, VRAM does play a considerable part of Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024's experience with the system. So yeah, your PC plays a huge part of this, and my system, as I say, I've got a 4080 RTX 4080 GPU, an i7 13700K processor. Neither of which are shoddy. They're certainly not top of the league, but you know, I'd be paying an extra £1,000 really to get to 4090 or 5090 GPU levels, and the only thing that strains it is Microsoft Flight Simulator, if I'm honest. So it's £1,000 compared to just, you know, whatever. But you get where I'm coming from with that. And so hardware, we haven't really discussed it, but hardware does play a huge part of it. Let me just click back into this. So as I say, the minimum spec for me, RTX 2080, is too low. 3070 and higher, I suspect I would consider that to be the lowest, and I think medium is 3080, no, 4080 and above really, for me, for flight simulation. As I say, on other things like racing or whatever it might be that I don't participate in, it might be different, but for me, flight simulation is always one of those things where the better the equipment you can get, generally speaking, the better your experience. However, you do also have to remember the law of diminishing returns, in that you can get to the point where you're paying astronomical amounts of money for very small performance gains. So it's always worth considering that. Plug and play, it is pretty much. I will mention now my first bugbear of the headset is that when I had the HP Reverb, it had a socket or a plug connector right at the base of the headset, which whilst it was sometimes a bit flaky, it meant I can disconnect the headset, put it to one side without having to muck around. If I want to do that with the Pimax, I have to actually have extension leads running out the computer and then disconnect the extension leads, or it has an additional power supply, external power supply. If I turn that off, that will turn the headset off as well. But they're not quite as functional or straightforward as just basically unplugging the headset, and then your PC and the system will recognize there's no headset there and will respond accordingly. So that's my first bugbear, is I'd like an easy way to connect or disconnect the headset from the PC. Now, one of the things that for me is significant is I try and make sure that the power supply is as stable as I can get for the whole thing, for my whole computer. But the display port, obviously, I just stick straight in the back of the PC to try and minimize the impact of any other factors. But that's one of the things. I just, for me, the HP Reverb was much better with this option where you could just unclip the lead from the headset. It sometimes got a bit flaky, but it was a very slick system for me. Not something a lot of other headset developers do that I'm aware of. We'll have a look at something that is I found startling. Insane. Yes, I would agree to an extent, but I'm not a fan of what I call vacuous statements. I want to experience things and understand things. So specifications, 35 ppd. Again, that's for me, that's bananas per display. QLED. Most headsets are either QLED or OLED these days. The resolution, basically strap an HD TV to each eye. Refresh. Field of view is something that's developed on and off for various headsets. Now, the field of view, you've got to bear in mind, if you start putting cushioning in front of your between your head and the headset, you're changing the field of view. You're moving your view further back, and therefore, in terms of comfort, you may get a smaller field of view than the developer intended. IPD 58 to 72 millimeters. The IPD adjustment on this headset is brilliant. It's just literally a little scroll wheel on the left hand side of the headset. Wheel it up and down until and you don't need the numbers. Other headsets you end up with looking in the mirror with little rulers trying to work out your IPD, etc. The fact that you've got a scroll wheel is basically you can just scroll it until you feel comfortable, and Bob's your uncle, done. So I think the IPD adjustment, the method they've gone down, is brilliant. I know other headsets do automatic IPD, but in the absence of that, the cheaper option is this sort of mini scroll wheel. I find it brilliant. Certainly preferable to software settings as well for me. Foveated rendering. So foveated rendering, there's a lot of terminology when you go into a new area that you are like, well, what the hell was that? Foveated rendering is basically the same as your eyeball. When you look at something, the central sort of cone of your vision is very high detail. So you can look at something, you can read something, you can look at fine detail, etc. But your peripheral vision outside that is fuzzy. So you can't read text, for example, but you can see that the sheet of paper is there. Foveated rendering does basically the same thing as the human eyeball. The central bit where you're looking is much higher clarity and much more detailed than moving outside. Now, obviously, from my perspective, as I understand it, that means there's less stress on the hardware. So in other words, by copying the human eye, what it means is that central point is they're able to display that at a higher resolution than, say, the outside. So if you look at your 2D monitor, it's the resolution and the detail across the whole display is exactly the same. Doesn't matter what part of a 2D monitor you look at. If you're looking in 3D, you've got that sort of sweet spot. That's great, but it also creates a problem in that sweet spot, if you're not looking at the sweet spot, the display quality is much, much worse. And so you might find, if I'm doing a video, you might find me bouncing the headset around trying to find that sweet spot, trying to get myself lined up with it. and then you end up with the element, you know, do you crush your skull, tightening it up to the point where you know, this thing doesn't move, or do you accept that for comfort you have to wind it off a bit, and accept you might have to just move the headset around a little bit? That is down to personal preference. For me, it's not always the easiest to find and stay in that sweet spot, but that's a personal thing in many respects. And then the audio on the headset is not particularly great if you don't add things like the DMAS headsets and earpieces. But let's pop into the store, have a look at the prices. The Crystal Lite is 718 Great British pounds. To go to the Super, it's quite a jump up, but this is without tax and without shipping. So obviously it does become a bit more expensive than that. So let's click into that because that's what we're looking at. As I say, now when you buy it, you get the hand controllers as standard, but obviously I think it's a little bit more. And they did have a thing, I think, in the last time I looked at it, where your only option for purchasing it was to have a down payment and then a number of other payments for 2 years. Whereas now I think this is returning. I think it does both methods now, but 718 pounds, Great British Sterling pounds, for the headset alone without shipping and taxes. As I say, I think you can buy other bits. Now the microphone, what I've done, it was recommended by somebody on one of my videos, is I've got a little earpiece and microphone, same as you'd have on your mobile phone, you know, for the days when we used to have that, and it's on a little 3.5mm jack, and you just plug it into the bottom right corner of the headset, and it means that you're not using the headset's built-in speakers, so you've got speakers, microphone, etc. It wasn't very expensive. I can't remember the price off the top of my head, but obviously they have a number of packages. I always question someone who creates a package where all of a sudden there's other things that improve it, and you know, at the back of my head, and this is a personal feeling, I'm sat there going, well, why wasn't that part of the development of the item in the first place? As I say, without the DMAS ear speakers, or an external headset, the sound quality is not particularly great. And then you've got, again, minimum recommended and best experience. As I say, the best experience, you're looking, I would say, even more than a 4070 Ti. You know, for me, a 4080 seems to be the sweet spot in terms of the balance between cost and benefit. Obviously, you can go up to a 4090, 4050. It's not on there now. Sorry, a 5090, which isn't on there at the moment. And again, you want Series 13 or above CPU. This is quite good for me in terms of physically laying out what you need in terms of kit. It's often, I'd say, you need 64 gig of RAM, I would say, but that's just a personal thought. You know, I haven't got the ability to sit there and test on a test bed with all sorts of things. I'll bring this up. The Oculus Rift S was the first headset I had. This is in effect my journey. So I had the Oculus Rift S, which I couldn't get on with. It didn't have the detail, it didn't have the fidelity to be used in a flight sim. You just couldn't see what the buttons were saying. Yes, you could use it in air combat, but you couldn't really operate systems with it. I then went on to the HP Reverb first generation. That was much better. £600 with controllers, and then I went on to the Pimax Crystal Lite, which was, as I say, my copy was used, but obviously they've got a higher price if you want to buy it straight off them. I'm only going to highlight a couple of bits. Let's scroll down and see if I can see them. Resolution, so we've gone from basically 1440p per eye to 2160, so we're looking at, what's that, 2K, and even more here, so we're not far off 4K per eye there. So that's a significant jump. That's why for me it is worth investing in the Pimax Crystal Lite, because other headsets of only a couple of years before just didn't have the resolution to be usable. Now I'm going to discuss resolution when we're in the air as well, because it's significant. Visible field of view, as you can see, year on year we've just got better predominantly. So the one at the bottom really is the the one at the top is the one that's, I think, most important to us, because our lateral vision is significant, and you can see it's increasing. So 115 degrees. However, don't get caught in the trap of thinking that's amazing. Our human field of view is over 180 degrees, so we're still looking down toilet roll tubes, but it is significantly better than predecessors. Pixel density, bananas per whatever. The average is probably the most accurate thing to be looking at, and it's 1361 for the early Rift S, which at the time was thought to be a good headset. Then we jump up to 23.63, which is not significant, but now we're up to 35 with the so the HP Reverb was borderline usable in Flight Sim for me, but it didn't quite nail it. Once we get to the Pimax Crystal Lite, I think it's much better. We'll demonstrate that in the sim. There's a couple of elements I want to show. Weight is what the weight is, and if we've got there's tracking outside in tracking controllers. Where's the foveated rendering bit? As I say, it's got foveated rendering, which some of the other stuff didn't have. It just did it as basically straight monitors. One of the things I highlight with the HP Reverb is that Windows Mixed Reality, Windows are no longer supporting this. There's like open source stuff that does, but just bear that in mind. But yeah, I can't find the bit on fixed foveating rendering. Get your words out. So, right, let's jump in and have a quick look at what we've got then. Okay, guys, so here we are at Popham in our Diamond DA42, and the first thing that becomes apparent is the foveated rendering. So, as I look down, I need to put my head, line up my head in a particular position to see the digits. So 540, 520, 540 is very clear on the right, the 30, 40 very clear on the left. If I just move my glance around with my eyes slightly, 255 is great on the bottom. Move my head to there, and even if I look down, the 255 is blurry. So it's not a massive change in position before something becomes blurry. Now, one of the things I'll say is it's much better, in my opinion, for the realism of flight than, say, a head tracking system like TrackIR. TrackIR, you'd move your head and then you'd have to do your eyes in the opposite direction. So to maintain that 2D screen, you would look in front of you. If you want to move your head, you'd turn left, but you'd look to your eyes would move to the right in order to see your 2D screen. 3D, and it's not specific to this headset, is much better. Now, looking around the aircraft with this headset, the detail is exceptional. It's very high clarity, very high detail. Obviously, the foveated rendering has quite a big impact. You need to remember that this is almost linked to your head as opposed to your eyeballs. Now, certain things become very apparent. So the 3D element, the cowlings, etc., and the prop look absolutely gorgeous. Looking along the wing looks gorgeous. The problem you have is now, if you're looking behind, you have to turn your whole body to get a view behind that's got any particular quality. Yes, you can turn your eyes, but then it starts to go blurry. So the best way to think of this is I'm almost looking through an eyeball here. Imagine imagine the headset is now my complete eyeball. If I want to look to the left, whereas in my eyes I just sort of move them to the left, in here what I have to do is look to the left with the headset. It's not a biggie, you get used to it. But again, going to the headset itself, I'm not having any stutters, I'm not having any issues with that. It's moving around quite freely. When I'm using the foveated rendering, the numbers, so the 255 there becomes really crystal clear. Headset position makes a big difference. So you might see me on occasions move the headset around just to reset where the center point is for my foveated rendering in relation to my face and my head. The headset itself with the additional bits is quite comfortable. I can move my head quite freely without it feeling like it's going to fall off. Moving it backwards tends to just end up with my foveated rendering being off. So all of a sudden now I can't see the 255. I need to reposition that. Now if I click up the back to tighten it, I can now see, I just need to reset where I'm looking at. There we go, the 255 is nice and clear. Move my head up, 255 remains nice and clear, or thereabouts-ish. Where we're going, there we go. That's your payoff really, comfort versus stability of the headset. There's no way around it. The more pressure you put on your head, like squeezing some sort of tomato in a vice, yes, the better it is for holding on to the foveated rendering position and your centering of your headset, but it can become uncomfortable over a period of time. So I just tend to knock mine off a few notches. You probably heard the clunk clunk there. Again, looking around, you can see detail to a level on this map over here. Obviously being Microsoft Flight Simulator, you can pop this out. So if we pop it out, we can come up here to our toolbar, click that, should pop it out, it's down here, and then as long as I get the spot in the right place, I can read that 5112 north and 00113 west, which is something I wouldn't have been able to do with the previous headset. Even the HP Reverb wouldn't have been able to help me out with that. So I can see the waypoint there, that's Pepis. I can see the menu options down here, all very nice, all very clear, which is, you know, one of the things you're looking for with VR is the ability to use all of the tools available to you in the aircraft. Now, over here, there's a lot of information on this. It's very difficult to read, but if I click the right button on the mouse, I can now read it clearly with a lot of clarity, which is really, really cool. You have to be careful where you position things like this notepad. If it goes over the top of buttons, and sometimes what you can end up doing is clicking through and clicking the button without realizing it. I've had to turn the dev mode off because I keep looking around and end up with clicking the dev mode stuff, which causes an absolute nightmare. Looking at a distance isn't too bad because obviously in real life yes, you can see a lot of distance at a great deal of distance. You can see a lot of detail, sorry, at a great deal of distance. But it doesn't really impact too much on the sim here. And that's down to a combination of sim settings and the performance of the PC more than anything. I've tried to see if I can focus on performance rather than appearance. But as soon as we come round to, so for example, down to the grass, crystal clear, engine cowling, crystal clear, panels, if I get the foveated rendering in the right place, they become crystal clear as well. So yeah, the headset as a whole is really quite nice for VFR flying. Now, airliners is a different thing. Airliners, imagine that you've got this as your McDo, that down here. Yes, you can read it, but it becomes very, very fiddly. And this is where there's kind of an offset between physical hardware and VR. Physical hardware with a 2D screen, very easy to do a physical McDo, for example. On a screen like this where you're constantly able to move your head, it becomes quite fiddly. So this is where airliners for me start to lose the feel of realism, start to lose that immersion. Helicopters are very similar to this in terms of VFR, and so certain aircraft will benefit in terms of VFR and IFR. They will tend to be the smaller aircraft where the screens aren't quite so not the screens, sorry, the switches etc aren't quite such of an issue. But let's get ourselves airborne and we'll see what the headset's like when airborne. Let me just get to my little switch on my HOTAS, get rid of that. And with a force feedback stick, this becomes really quite immersive. Now, out to the right, because of my my visual deficit, it's not so much of an issue, but to the left, I am aware of the toilet tube effect, as I describe it, of that sort of harsh boundary where you go 75 knots. Let's get off. Popham's really quite a short airfield. Let's not stall. Keep control of the aircraft, Ricardo. Press gear up. Let's climb away. I can see it flashing next waypoint on the top of the MFD there. So although we're well within flap limiting speed, we will take flaps 1, or flaps up I should say. Climb away. And the sim works pretty good, so 10 degrees nose up at 100% power should give us about 100 knots, which it is doing. Now looking out in the distance, a bit blurry, I would expect that, to be honest, because of the way the sim's rendering. Your level of detail, and I'm pushing right up against the VRAM limits of my card here. It's going to be about 15 plus, something like that. I can't see it, and I've had to turn off dev mode, so it won't be visible on the video either. But I had a warning when I loaded in with the VRAM warning, where it comes up with a white panel to say that you're really limiting what your system is capable of here. We've gone well beyond where I wanted to turn, but we'll turn right here and we'll see if we can get back into Popham. It's very difficult to see Popham in a sim, any sim, 2D, 3D, it doesn't matter what it is. But we don't want to be climbing anymore, so we'll just bring the nose down, take a bit of power off, and turn ourselves round to an approximate base leg. And looking out at the scenery with this headset, it looks glorious. We're going to come around and see if we can see Popham. There we go. Is that Popham down there? Not entirely sure. Where is it? Back into the right a bit. It's over there somewhere. Is that it there? Possibly. It's like a green field in the space of brown. I've tried to find it before. It's quite a difficult airfield to find. So we'll turn sort of a base leg in a moment. But we'll talk about the headset. The headset detail, certainly in the cockpit, is exceptional. Very, very good for this level of complexity in an aircraft. And I'm sure in a 172, something like that, it would become even more significant. Right, let's just go around to the right and we'll do a parallel of the downwind. I say downwind, it's not downwind, this is going to be parallel to the runway. We're going to have a much more significant, take a bit of that power off, we're going to have a much more significant turn onto the sort of offset final. Let's see how we get on. But this is, you know, the ability to look around is fantastic, and to do so with such clarity is very, very beneficial. Bring the speed down a little bit, and we don't really want to be descending, otherwise we're not going to be able to see the airfield. Still descending. And we're going to be turning in shortly to get there. Right. Headset weight, it's not excessive. However, if I move my head back and then forwards, sometimes what I have to do is reset the headset position for the foveated rendering, which can be quite a faff on occasions. If it's too far forward, it sits on the bridge of my nose, and that can be quite painful over a period of time. Looking left and right doesn't have a massive issue. You've got to bear in mind, compared to say a 2D screen with a head tracker, you're going to have to be much more mobile to look around behind yourself. And whilst it's more realistic maybe, it is also something where you have to be aware of it, that you're going to be moving your head an awful lot more. Looking down the wing, it looks absolutely glorious. I can make out the detail of the wing in terms of the vortex generators on both sides. The detail on the cowlings is lovely. In the cockpit, we've already discussed, you can see most of the details pretty much clearly. Going to need to turn in now and see if we can see the airfield. Now actually, because it's an offset approach, it's almost got two approaches. It's got the first bit of the approach where you're kind of trying to find your direction in, and it's kind of a green puddle in the middle of a load of brown really. So let's just turn ourselves a bit further and look out to the left. I think that's it over here. Just here, you see. So let's see if that's it. I think it is. I want to just bring the speed up a little bit, but I want to retain the height so I can see what I'm flying towards. So I'm losing a little bit of the clarity there, but that's more sim related than headset related, so I've still got all my numbers available to me. Yeah, that's it. One of the advantages of the Diamond DA40 and 42 is the fact that they've got very high gear limiting speed, which actually matches the VNE. So you can almost use it as an air brake as well. And we're down a little bit low at 84 knots, I think. So we're going to come down here, and then we've got to swing a good 60 degrees right turn. So I'm going to offset slightly to the left. I'm going to make sure I trim so I'm not fighting the stick all the while. Stick final flap down. So as you can see, I'm slightly offset to the left. The runway is going off to our right, about 60 degrees off to our right. So I now have to judge the turn, the speed, and look over the top. Don't turn the power off too early. Reduce the power and try and settle before we get to the top of the hill. We'll add a bit of brake, let the gravity help us out a lot here, and we are down. So here we are in DCS. As I said, we'd have a very quick look in DCS, and one of the things that I really like with DCS is the ability to set up individual graphics profiles. So you've obviously got the low, medium, high that you'd normally get in most sims, but you also have the ability to save multiple sets of settings. So normally it's got low, medium, high VR, I think. I should have left the menu in situ. But you also, in fact, can I get the menu here? Can I get the menu here? If I press escape, escape again. Briefing, we adjust controls options. System, audio, special, VR. No, you'd have to be out of the main options. Oh no, down here. So you can see we've got low, medium, high VR as the main settings, but you can also set custom settings, and I think I've got mine set up as custom setting 3 at the moment. Now I've not made a lot of changes from the default settings, so these are the settings I've got. I really do like the fact that you've got such ease of use of the menus in VR in DCS, and the headset makes it nice and clear. It's relatively close compared to a distant object, so for example objects over here might appear a little bit sort of more blurry, but the menu screen looks absolutely crystal clear. So let's click OK there. So what we'll do is we'll have a look in and out of the plane in terms of the VR. VR is really beneficial in DCS because of the fact that you're always looking around, unlike an airliner where you're not really going to look around to the same extent. So HUD, very clear. Sometimes I get double vision personally, so clarity in terms of things like the HUD is very clear and very important. So I can see all the markers, I can see all the text nice and clearly. There's absolutely no issues reading any part of the HUD. In terms of the cockpit, the actual cockpit construction and textures, etc., again the headset makes them all nice and clear. There's no distortion, there's no obvious issues with regarding to the headset's ability to cope with 3D modeling. So let's see, you can quite easily move things. One of the benefits of head tracking for me compared to say for example one of the benefits of VR compared to head tracking for me is the fact that with head tracking you are compressing, so that would be potentially there would be 180 looking directly behind you, so you're compressing that you're making that distance of your vision do 180 degrees of vision in terms of in the sim. That means that obviously for me I found that it was very twitchy, so I'd be looking at something and I'd end up like this trying to get a flap switch, and that's obviously reduced because VR is 1-to-1. Now obviously I can see the flap switch there, I can see the digit nice and clearly. This text is starting to come slightly blurry until I put my sweet spot over it, and then I can see that nicely. And that's the key thing with this headset is you need to basically point the sweet spot at whatever you want to see with clarity. Now if you're following a bogey, it may not be quite such of an issue because you don't necessarily need to see it in detail, you just need to see it. So the headset I find is just very good in DCS. Now the Rift S, we'll start taxiing as we go actually. Let me see, we've got everything sorted. Just need to take the parking brake off. Where's my doofer gone? There we go. As I say, I've only just reloaded DCS onto my system. I haven't flown it properly in about 6 months, and I've had to reset everything. And I'll be honest, I was never I never did the most hours in DCS. A lot of my hours were in civilian sims, where VR is less common. Is probably the best way of describing it. There's certain areas of civilian simulation where it's really beneficial, but things like combat and military sims, it's really hugely beneficial. You'll occasionally see me adjust my headset. So we'll just talk about some of the indications and what I'm seeing. So down here on this left MFD, I can see the digits, the large digits in the center quite clearly, and the heading line and all of the telemetry around the sides, so the 3.3, the 3.0, the west, etc. around. I can see the underlying 3D map. That's nice and clear. What I can't see as clearly is the text. That's the vertical line of text right on the left hand side of the MFD. So this text here, you can just about see that the top left one's TCN TACAN. I don't want to go charging over the top of the runway onto the soil. I'm not taxiing particularly vigilantly compared to what I would be doing in real life, or what somebody would be doing in real life. There'd be much more. There we go. It wasn't. My nose wheel steering wasn't engaging, but nothing to affect us in terms of flight because I didn't put anything in the program, which is nice. But getting back to it, the visual acuity is, or the visual detail is enough to operate this aircraft with the MFD. That could not be said with the Rift S. It could not really be said with the HP Reverb 2, Reverb G1, which I had. Now you could fly this in VR with the HP Reverb G1. You didn't quite get the same clarity, you didn't get quite the same imagery, but it was good enough just to operate it. Whereas I would now say at this level, it's very operable. So you've got SCL down here, for example, is nice and clear. The buttons are all very clear, particularly once you get to the reserve arming panel down here. Very, very clear indeed. This text is too small on this MFD, so I can't quite make that out, which is a shame. This is all your engine and airframe parameters for setup for, in this case, Stovall. Fuel panel and so fuel panel nice and clear. Standby instruments all very nice and clear. 3D objects in the cockpit, absolutely superb. The 3D appearance of the cockpit, close to your point of view, very, very good indeed. You can even see just about some of the numbers here for 5, 10, etc. on this timer. Once you get into the distance, it becomes a little bit more fuzzy, as you would imagine. The rendering close-up is very, very good. As you get into the distance, a little bit fuzzy. However, it's still notably better than previous generations of headsets, which is what you would expect. So let's take the brakes off. We've got catering nose wheel at the moment. Let's just pop nose wheel steering on just to until we get some airspeed over the controls. I'm going to over-temp the engine, but I really don't care because it's so long since I've flown this thing. Come on, get airborne. I haven't even properly set up the controls in this, to be honest. And it's one of those things, currency makes a huge difference. The less time you spend practicing something, the less competent you're going to be at it. Let's get the gear up. Make sure the flaps are going into the right position. Let's power ourselves away. I really need to set this up because the joystick I've got is really very good, but the settings I've got for the controls are not very good. Right. Now at the moment it's very smooth. The controls and the indications I can see through the HUD are very, very clear indeed. Move my head to the left, they become less clear. Move my head to the right, they become less clear. Look at them, they're nice and clear. Not too much stuttering at the moment, but there's not too many assets loaded in terms of, let's just trim this out a little bit, shall we? In terms of the assets, there's not much loaded in. There's a little bit of stutter there. and that's going to be something that I need to tune out as a combination between my system and the headset, the CPU, the GPU, etc. I've probably got too much detail into the map, but you do get a very good impression of 3D, and it depends on personal preferences at this point. At that point, because I'm looking up and my eyes are looking up, it becomes quite fuzzy. Bring the nose round and we get back into the point where I can see the detail, and the clarity is superb in that really important little zone in the middle. I'm going to go and have a mess around here. Now, as assets are loading in, you'll see that vision starts to stutter a bit, looking left and right. My force feedback stick is going absolutely mad. It's not happy with the speed we're doing. It is the AV8B profile I've got on the Moza, but unless you've flown an AV8B, it's hard to determine whether it's accurate or not. I'm not convinced it would be so aggressive in terms of vibration. Just have a look round. So we're not too bad at the minute. I'm not convinced it'd be so violent in its vibration, but that's a different matter for a different day. But yeah, the stuttering is present. I don't know if you can see that, but it's not too bad. But when I look out the front and I start to minimise what's in the view, it's less of an issue. Detail is pretty good at ground level. Again, as I strain and look around with my eyes, the foveated rendering, it's not intrusive, but it is something that you are aware of in terms of making sure that your vision's in that sweet spot. A bit of a tighter turn, see how we get around here. A bit of stuttering in the distance, I suspect you can probably see that. And then once I stop turning, it starts to settle itself out again. So if we've got a rapid change of imagery, which is more likely in DCS than say it is in Microsoft Flight Simulator, I would argue, because of the manoeuvring, it's going to be something that's alright. As I say, the sort of rapid change of heading and the rapid change of scenery for me is going to be something that may be more prevalent in a combat sim than it would be in a civilian sim. But overall, I think the headset for me is very good. The clarity really helps, particularly in terms of the instrumentation, the HUD, etc., compared to previous generations, like the HP Reverb, like certainly the Rift S wouldn't be able to have anywhere near the enjoyment that you can do with a later generation headset. Although obviously the Rift S ran on a much lower spec computer than we now have. But yeah, that looks quite impressive. A little bit of stuttering. Bring ourselves around, see what we got. It's not too bad. Having said that, we're on a very low impact map compared to some other maps. So this and Caucus aren't too bad, for example. Other maps may strain it more, but that's really down to optimising your GPU and your CPU setup. As I say, I haven't got a massive amount of experience setting this up, for example, for DCS. It's just a matter of having a look at some videos, spending the time, and then jumping in and out of the sim, change the setting into your mission, change the setting into your mission, and so on and so forth. But overall, the impression with regards to the cockpit with the headset is really, really impressive. As I say, we're now becoming limited by hardware once we get to the stage of ramping up the scenery. But anyway, let's jump out of this. So let's round things up with a kind of summary at the end. Unfortunately, I was hoping to show you some X-Plane stuff, but X-Plane is being an absolute spanner. It hasn't worked properly for me for some time now, just adjusting my headset. What we're going to do is have some sort of summary. Before we go any further, this is the Air Mackie 339 by India Fox Teco, and it is an absolutely glorious little jet, particularly in 3D. I cannot say just how much I think this is a beautiful little jet. and how well it looks, how good it looks in 3D. The detail with the Pimax headset is enough so that I can see the second hand moving nicely here. I can see the bars there and there for my mouse is particularly sticky on this mouse mat. The bars there and there for the ILS. The detail is absolutely superb. The feeling of depth and reality is really high quality. The nature of when you get the sweet spot on things, the detail is just staggering. A little bit jittering there. Might be due to the fact that it's outside in tracking. So you can get tracking posts for these things. But we're going to have a quick trip airborne. I'll probably crash it on landing because my rudder pedals on this are, I mean, if you look at there, they're not particularly ridiculous, but there's something about the aircraft when I'm taking off and landing that makes the rudder pedals a little bit oversensitive for me. There we go, and we're rolling. Full power. Try and keep it on the centre line. I'll stop talking whilst I'm concentrating. And I am concentrating very hard. That's 100. 120. It's going to want to fly soon. 130. Let's ease it back, see if it wants to go. There we go. Gear up. She's coming past 200. Flaps up. Just trim. And there we go. We're nicely off. Okay, so VR performance. I mean, this is just spectacular. I am getting some stuttering. So one of the things you need to do with VR, which is not something I've done particularly well, is you need to make sure that you set all of your graphics settings to get the best performance for me out of VR. There's nothing more disconcerting, or nothing that gets rid of the mood of VR more than a stuttering, horrible mess in front of your face. For me, it's more important to have something that's smooth over something that is shiny and graphically amazing. But let's come back around. I saw something here the other day that I think, given this, I need to try and find it again. Given this winter terrain, which is fantastic, by the way. Let's bring ourselves round. And this is the sort of thing that in 3D, one-to-one comparison between where you're looking and where your head is gives you really good perception of what's going on. It's on this side somewhere. Where's it gone? Trains coming in and out. That does ruin a little bit of the immersion factor. You'll see what it is when we get there. But we need to talk about a summary of some description of my experience, as I say, of buying a used Pimax Crystal Lite. There's going to be two elements to it. The Pimax Crystal Lite is an element. The other element is my experience, and in terms of, look at that runway and airfield down there, although it's popping in and popping out. Where's it gone? I haven't seen it yet. I'll show you it when I see it, but you can't see it. We'll be going up and down this element of the terrain anyway. But there's two elements. One is the Crystal Lite itself, and the other element is my experience in terms of purchasing it the way I did. And the easier of the two is how I purchased it. Now, my experience has been pretty good. That is not to say two things. It's not to say that anybody else who followed my path into virtual reality would find the same experience. I guarantee that for every good experience there's going to be multiple bad experiences. The second thing is, as I say, although I've had a good experience, that is not going to be the case for a lot of people. There are too many variables out there for me to say that this is a good thing to do. And as I've reiterated previously in the video, almost ad nauseum I would suggest, the reality is that it's a high-risk way of buying a high-tech consumer product, because I've got no guarantee. Even if the headset's only 9 months old, I don't know how old it is, but even if it was only 9 months old, I still got no guarantee. because from Pimax's perspective, where the hell have I got it? And I don't blame them. That's not a Pimax thing. That's a me thing, because I haven't really got much of a history of the headset. I don't know if anyone's tried to repair it. There's no obvious marks of that. I don't know if anybody's had issues with it. I don't know if there's been any issues with the software and so on and so forth. It's just, it hasn't come from Pimax. It isn't from an official recognised vendor, and therefore my comeback, if something goes wrong with it, is going to be pretty low, if not zero. And therefore I've got a high-tech electrical item that may fail. I've got no comeback. It just becomes a very good doorstop if that happens. The next thing to consider with that is not just the financials, it's in terms of the ability to get it repaired. I would suggest that Pimax have no responsibility for me, having bought off a third party. Even if I was really nice to them, there's no responsibility on their part to even fix the product. So there's a couple of things. So you basically, any money you spend, you've got to be willing to lose. That's why I would never recommend it. Now, I'm sure there's others who are going to follow the same path as me, which is absolutely fine, given that you're aware of those sorts of hiccups. The other thing is, with a lot of these things, if I go and buy a used car, I can go and see it in person. I can test it, I can take it for a test drive, I can make sure it all works very well, and that it's the right thing for me to have that car. Because sometimes it will be a perfectly serviceable headset and you just won't like the experience. It makes you motion sick, or your computer isn't capable of running it, and so for some people they will have a really poor experience through no fault of Pimax's. And one of the elements that brings into it is in terms of performance and hardware that you need to run these things. Now, VR as a general rule is very resource hungry. It always has been. There is no way that you can strap two very specialised monitors to your eyeballs in addition to whatever you're running on your main PC, and not expect it to have some detrimental impact on your overall performance. That means that it's that oft said element of flight simulation that the more your CPU and GPU are capable of delivering, generally speaking, the better your experience is going to be. Now, normally we'd have law of diminishing returns in a lot of things. You know, for that last 1% of performance, you might be paying twice the cost of the item. It's not quite as bad as that. This is what I would consider now to probably be a mid-range headset. It's got some areas where it's not got some of the features of other more expensive headsets. So it's got fixed foveated rendering as opposed to dynamic, for example. So this compared to, for example, the Super. But for me, it's kind of mid-range, but it's not cheap. Let's not kid ourselves, it's not cheap. Now, having gone down a route where I've bought it used, we'll see if we can find the bit I'm after down here. I don't know if I'm going to be able to find it. Having bought it used, value for money, it's very good value for money, but it's a very cautious tale in terms of that. Now, in terms of the headset itself, we'll discuss that. The build quality of the headset seems to me to be pretty robust. I've used it over the last 6 months. I've had no real issues with it. Nothing's come loose, nothing's come undone. It seems to be well constructed. There's a lot of plastic in its construction. There's pros and cons for that. Obviously, plastic allows potentially lighter headsets than other materials. Just looking to see if I can find it. Basically, Innsbruck has a ski jump out to the right hand side here, which I saw it before on a flight, and I'm just trying to find it again. Is that it there? That looks promising. Down here on the right, 1 o'clock. Maybe, maybe not. Yeah, that looks like it. There we go. Innsbruck's ski jump slope. How cool is that? We're about to stuff it into the ground. So as I say, build quality seems to be good. I've had no electrical issues. I've had no issues with losing pixels. I've had no issues with it being blurry. I like the ability to adjust the PPD on the left hand side at the top with the little scroll wheel, as opposed to having to try and measure it with a ruler and do all that faffing. I have no idea what the distance between my pupils is, but I don't need to. I can scroll a little wheel until it looks and feels right. 3.5mm jack in the side for me is one of two things are essential. You either get the DMAS speakers, which I've not got and haven't tested, but I understand they're an improvement over the basic sound that you get out of the headset, which I'll be honest is really quite poor, or you get a plug-in 3.5mm jack set of headphones, earpieces, which is what I've got after a recommendation from and please forgive me, I can't remember who it was who recommended it, but they said they even recommended the earphones to get, and I have to say they're very, very good earphones. But yeah, that inclusion of that little 3.5mm jack so that you can plug a set of earphones in, absolutely great. So there are cheaper options than the DMAS earpieces, but as I say, I haven't got the DMAS earpieces, so I can't test them or put any qualification or verdict onto it. It's just worth saying that the inbuilt speakers are not particularly great. Now, I'm not sure if it's supposed to have an inbuilt microphone. Obviously I get around that by having the 3.5mm jack earpieces, a bit like an old telephone headset with the microphone on the wire. I don't know if it should or shouldn't have them, so I don't know if my headset is okay because I don't get any microphone indications, or if it's faulty because I don't get any microphone indications. So it's difficult to know, and this is one of the things with buying it used. Now, what's my overall experience of using the headset? It's really quite good. It's very, very immersive to fly around in 3D. There are things that ruin the immersion, so when you aren't concentrating, you realise you're looking through a toilet roll tube and you've got some black mask areas off to your left. In most people's cases they'd have it on the right as well, but because of my visual impairment I don't. That can be an immersion loser. So can stuttering. So if you haven't got it set up properly and you start to see your scenery stuttering, that can really lose the immersive effects of 3D. I mean, look at that view down there. It's absolutely glorious, isn't it? Where were we? Yeah, stuttering in terms of performance, that can have a real bad effect on your immersion. So it's not the panacea in terms of flight simulation that is potentially out there. It does have limitations, and hardware is one of the biggest limitations. You know, running a couple of very high definition tellies next to your eyeballs strains even the best PC. If you haven't got the best PC, you're going to have to dial a lot back. Their suggested equipment settings on their webpage, I would suggest, are too low. So what I would suggest for anyone considering VR, if you've got an opportunity anywhere at any time to try it out, do so, because it can have real issues with motion sickness. For a lot of people it won't be an issue, but for some it will be a huge issue. So it's always worth trying it out. The second thing is, the effect is stunning initially. You sit there and go, wow, this is amazing. But cost becomes a real significant factor. Where's the air filter? Is that it there? I think it is. There it is. I'm going to try and do a landing. See how we get on. Moses is telling me the gear's coming down. Don't want to be too fast, but also don't want to go too slow. I'll put full flaps out. I think the limiting speed's probably going to be about 130, which I think it was in a Hawk. I'm not expecting a good landing. You can see it bobbles around in pitch quite easily. It's quite sensitive in pitch, and also There's the gear coming down, we're going to get an increase in drag. I think I'm going to have quite a high approach speed, but I can't remember what I've got in terms of bindings for speed brake. So it could be quite sporty, trying to stop before the end of the runway. Plus the fact the steering seems to be a little bit wayward for me. We're coming in at a very steep angle and slightly too high in terms of speed, so we'll try and rectify that as we come down. But one of the key things with VR is the depth perception. You do get really good depth perception. And the headset gives me really good clarity over the instruments, so I can see what's happening in terms of speed and all that kind of thing. I haven't flown this aircraft for a long time, so I haven't dialed in a lot of the settings for it. We're still coming down. But always used to have it in flight training where instructors would always say once it feels like the ground is coming up around your ears, that's the time to flare. So we'll see what it's like this. You can see how twitchy this thing is. So it's gone to 3 reds, but I'm quite happy to continue with this. I'm aiming for the threshold to give myself the biggest possible landing run available. 125 knots, we're coming in a bit low. Slightly off the centre line. Ooh, bounce. Ooh, rudder. Don't think I'm going to stop in time, am I? Oh, yes. Nowhere near the centre line. Whoa. What happened there? I don't know, maybe a burst of tyre, I don't know. Right. So, yeah, I think it's a high-risk way to procure a VR headset. I think in terms of the headset itself, we're leaping forwards in generations here, and I think the quality of visuals is very, very, very good. The detail that you can get out of the instruments now with a headset like the Crystal Lite is very, very good. I think for the price point, for me buying it used, obviously it's not really an issue because it was much cheaper. But the price point, I think, even if I were paying full price, is worth the £718 plus taxes plus shipping. So you could probably round it off to about £1,000. It's not cheap, but then if you look at the various amounts of hardware that is available out there, there's a lot of hardware that also isn't cheap, not just VR, but just general hardware. And so hopefully, more than anything else, that's provided information, guys. I'm not going to provide a recommendation because everyone has such specific circumstances, both individually and in terms of their equipment, their budget and all that kind of thing, that I'm not going to say go out and buy it, not going to say go out and don't go out and buy it. I think this video is the kind of video where it's all about providing information, particularly given the fact that I went about it in a normal route, shall we say. But I really do think Pimax have produced an excellent headset at a not too bad, not too shabby a price point. The experience is absolutely next level. So with that, guys, I'll leave you. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please don't forget to tick like, share, subscribe. As I say, I've demonetized the channel, so you know, I'm trying to cut down on the number of adverts. I don't get anything from them. I don't really get anything from the channel anyway, even if I were to monetize it, so hence why I've demonetized it. And with that, guys, I'll love you and leave you. See you in the next one. Take care.